Hey, it's Michael, and I've got a question for you. What's a stereotype you hold about a person or a group of people that you might need to rethink? Welcome to the follow up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore how we communicate well. What we have been taught about communication and what has been modeled and incentivized through culture has left us in a place where we know how to exert our ideas and opinions and beliefs onto each other, but we miss the entire other half of conversation, the extraction. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, to teach you how to ask curious questions, how to seek understanding over certainty, how to listen and give space, so that ultimately you might become a better communicator. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we reveal what connects us as humans: our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and what we stand for rather than what we are against. What shifts in the moment someone tosses aside your uniqueness, your personhood, your humanity in favor of a damaging and hurtful stereotype? That moment where you become a caricature of a certain type of person in someone's mind rather than the nuanced and intricate person standing in front of them. How does this affect relationships? What emotions bubble up? To Tim Wenzel, the answer to these questions lies within your response to this shift. You see, Tim believes that for so many of us, we're conditioned to be thoughtless in our response to being mislabeled or misunderstood. We buy into the fiction that our response should be more about the clapback rather than the step back. Tim has been there, and he's sharing his experiences and perspectives here in this episode. Tim is the creator of the Kindness Games, a challenge born out of the recent pandemic, intended to counter the disruption, the hate, the discontent that has engulfed our world. It's an initiative rooted in following your curiosity rather than your ego. Because as Tim details here in our conversation, he knows firsthand that tension, that conflict, that distrust, it can be overcome when you choose to respond to the sting of stereotype with curiosity. And as Tim explains, curiosity leads to self-control, which leads to effective and bridge-building dialogue that restores humanity. So Tim, not very many people know this, but sometimes, podcasters and their guests meet and talk and chat ahead of time. You and I have had an opportunity to do that. And you left me with like one of the biggest like tantalizing little tidbits of information or something to ask you about from our last conversation. So I'm going to start there because it's been on my mind since the first time we talked.
Okay.
You told me to make sure and ask you about your wife and you hanging out in the Bay Area, and there's a story attached to this. So we're going right there. We're going right off the deep end. I want to hear about this story
Wow.
that you wedded me with the first time we talked.
All right. Well, this is where you want to start off. I guess we're going to start off here. All right. So, actually, the interesting thing, my wife and I, excuse me, we were living in the Bay Area for like 7 years until COVID happened. And then we went home to Illinois, where we're both from. And so we were part of like the Friends Giving Club. All the holidays comes around and you don't have family, and there's a lot of other people who have moved to that area for work. They don't have family, and so you start getting together with people based on not having any family. Loneliness apparently is the big driver, and so we were doing that, and we found this couple who was fun to hang out with, And so one day we were just hanging out at the apartment complex down by the pool, and we're having a nice conversation. We had one of our foster children there, and one of our mutual friends, who's kind of an instigator, showed up and was like, "Hey, how's it going? Sit down." And so she joins us, and she said, "Tim, I have to hear your opinion on this thing." And it was something that was in the news at the time, and everybody was like, "No, we don't want to talk about that. Let's not talk about politics. That's not. We're having a nice time." And she's like, "Oh, okay, no problem, no problem. I just love to hear Tim's interesting opinions on these things." And they're like, "What? Well, how interesting of an opinion could you have on that topic?" And so the funny thing is, I didn't even give my opinion. I had just spent 3 years or 3 weeks in Europe on a work trip, and so I said, "Well, actually, this is a political thing. I was in Brussels. I was talking to people that work with the EU Parliament, all of these things, and here's what they had to say about it, which is not what our media is saying." And so I'm not saying it's fake news. I'm just saying that there's a lot of other people that don't see it that way. Not even my opinion. And they said, "Oh my God, are you a Republican?" And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of lean Republican. I'm conservative." They're like, "We had no idea that you were racist." I was like, "Oh." They're like, "You're a dangerous person." And I said, "Really?" And they said, "Yeah, you have dangerous ideas, and we're a lesbian couple, and you hate us." And I said, "Well, considering we've been hanging out for like 6 months, have you feel hated? Have you felt in danger? And you've seen the foster kids we've had. None of them look like us. Do you really think we're racist?" And so the reason I like to share that story is because that type of mentality is exactly what founded the kindness games a couple years later in 2020, because the pandemic had set in and everybody was cool for a while. Everybody was a little bit afraid. Everybody was at home. And then George Floyd happened, which was terrible. But then our media, our leaders, everybody, it seems like everybody in a position of power started to find their people and pit them against other people. It became an ideological Hunger Games to me, which is how the name the kindness games came out about it. Because instead of finding people that are vulnerable and chasing them down to kill them, like in the movie, we're going to find people who are vulnerable and we're going to lift them up and show the world the kindness they have done, the good things they have contributed to the world, and make sure that we're taking care of people. But you cannot do that if we're afraid to have conversations with other people who we might disagree with.
Wow. Okay, I'm glad I asked the question because that went that was not what I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that, Tim. So many questions. Okay. First question, do you remember the political event that the quote unquote instigator brought up? Do you even
It
remember
was
that?
it was something to do with Trump or whatever.
Gotcha.
And real quick footnote: those people that said that to us, super freaking cool to this day. So they're not bad people, and that's not the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. I
Still
appreciate you
friends.
making that point. I appreciate you making that point, making sure that we understood that you're still friends. I want to I do want to ask about how the relationship moved beyond that discussion. But before that, I want to ask you, Tim, in that moment of your friends, you're hanging out poolside, you're doing the friendsgiving thing, you've been in a friendship with these people or been acquainted with these people for I think you said 6 months now. In that moment where all of a sudden their perspective of you flipped from I know Tim the person to I'm now looking at Tim the stereotype. How did that feel to you, Tim?
Well, it never feels good, right? My wife was completely caught off guard.
Mm.
She actually got super nervous, and she actually I'm not going to say she had an anxiety attack or anything like that, but afterwards, like she couldn't come down for a couple hours. She was freaked out that that happened. Me, I worked at a Fortune 50 company. I'm in a head of programs there in global security, so I'm actually really used to having conversations, political conversations, not really about politics, but about what's going to happen at the company. How do we best align with the strategy, right? And so people will
Sure.
ask you tough questions and put you on the spot. So for me, it wasn't terrible because I'm used to that environment, although it was sad. But what if I had just lashed back out and said, well, you're a crazy person, or you're evil, or you're this, or any of the things that you can go and watch on the news today about whoever you may not agree with? Instead, I drew their attention to the fact that they actually knew better. And if they actually thought those things about us, we wouldn't have this relationship. And the cognitive dissonance of the echo chambers that we're in, we hear all these things to the point where we believe them because it's what we hear. And we don't actually think about them until we're slapped in the face with a context we didn't expect. And it causes a visceral reaction, which is a knee jerk reaction. And the reason knee jerk reactions, when you work with me in security, there are really only two things that will get you fired from my team. One, being malicious, because we have a joyful environment. We love to be with each other, and making mistakes is fine, but being malicious is not. And the other thing is, if you're in management, a knee jerk reaction, because it is the least thoughtful thing you can do at any given point in time. And we are conditioning ourselves to be thoughtless at every given moment of time, which is sad.
I want people to just sit and let that resonate with them for a moment. It's so true, Tim. I feel like you don't have to deal. I said in my first TEDx talk, we so often sling our arrows without ever having to deal with the ramifications of where they may land. And I feel like you just encapsulated it better than what I said in that talk. We're conditioned to be thoughtless constantly. I like that perspective. Okay, so I'm curious. Your job, you kind of related it to that. Your job, people being malicious, people having knee jerk reactions, your livelihood is based on that. But Tim, what keeps you from having that knee jerk reaction in that moment? What kept you from having that knee jerk reaction in that moment where you instead decided, I'm not going to respond to this, but I'm going to get a little bit curious here? And you did exactly what I hope people do when listening to this show, is ask them questions. What what is true in your life, what has been true for you, where that became your response and not the knee-jerk reaction?
Well, I'm glad you said you're curious because, shameless plug, the kindness games, we have some values for building a foundation so that you can lead with kindness holistically throughout your life in every aspect of your life. And the very first set of values are curiosity leads to self control. When we're curious in the face of adversity, it does a couple things. One, we get to solicit information rather than just dealing with the accusation. Two, we get to breathe because we get to ask a question and we get to be quiet. And we get to slow down the engine, right? We get to like bring the revs down. We get to breathe and we get to listen and we get to wait for the next response from that person. And usually when you ask a question to somebody who's just hurled something at you, they're waiting for your defense so that they can land the next blow. They're not looking for the sidestep and then like, why would you even do that? And so they pause. And then you find yourself in a magical place. You're waiting, they're confused, and you get to ask yourself, if they respond in a way that is amicable and they start to back down, should I destroy them? Or should I offer them grace and accept that we are humans? And actually, I believe you can define humanity across all cultures, across all times, as the condition of having high aspirations and goals and consistently failing to meet them. So, as humans, we live in disappointment with ourselves, disappointment with each other. So, why are we surprised when we are disappointing? And so, anyways, that curiosity leads to self control. It redirects the conversation from the battle, and it allows that person to step back and say, I don't know why I said that. And you can say, that's cool, man. I say things I don't mean to all the time. But I'm curious to why you said it, though. Like, I would love to have the conversation, not about what you think of me, not about like this thing, but like where your head's at today, because you're not normally like that, right? I normally encounter you like this and this and this. You can tell them about all the good things they are, but there's a break. So there must be something going on today. Can I listen? Can I help you? And that's what I've learned to do. Be curious, offer grace.
Where did that conversation go from there? In that moment of offering your curiosity and extending that grace to your friends after I'll call it an attack, or what probably felt like an attack.
It was an
Where did
attack at
the
the time.
where did the conversation go from there?
It went exactly where I told you it went. I asked them some questions. They backpedaled, and everybody was kind of like, and then they kind of stepped back. And I said, I think we had a nice time today. I'll see you later. And we got up and left. And then about 2 weeks later, we found ourselves in the same store with them at a store event. So this store was having this huge event with giveaways and everything. It was the opening of the ski season. So winter gloves and skis and stuff. And I saw them and they made eye contact with me. And I said, hey, how's it going? From across the room. And then I gave them the next move. And they came across the store. They hugged us. They said how good it was to see us again. And then they apologized. And they said, we don't know what came over us. And we thought about the questions that you asked us for the last couple of weeks. And we realized that we were out of line. You are obviously not what we said. And we forgave them. We said it was fine. We understand how things are these days. The world is a complicated place and it pits people against each other. And that we love to have their friendship. And we maintained friends until they moved away before COVID. And then we moved away during COVID. But just a few months ago, I was actually in the San Francisco airport and I saw one of these ladies in there and we sat down for an hour, looked at
Oh my
pictures,
gosh.
talked. And it was amazing.
How cool is that, Tim? Man, that's so awesome. Gosh. Okay. Where in the world did you get that perspective from? What has been true in your life I'm just curious, that was your response in that moment, that you talked about the curiosity and extending grace. Where have you gained this perspective, Tim?
It's a lifelong journey, man. It's a long story. Essentially, I spent my 20s in Iraq. I was part of the army invasion. And then we were one of the first units to be extended to do a 15-month tour. So let's say in January of 2003, we got mobilized before the invasion. The invasion started in March. We were in country in March. And then we didn't leave until July of 04. And then in that interim, we got assigned to a place called Abu Ghraib prison, and we actually relieved that unit of duty who tortured the prisoners, but we didn't know that's what we were doing. And then all of a sudden, the news descended upon us, and every day I saw people that I'd only ever seen on TV because I'm from the cornfield of Illinois, man. Up to this point, I had never gone anywhere outside the Chicagoland area, and very rarely to Chicago. Really, just to White Sox games and back. And when I got back, people are like, "Oh my gosh, I bet you're so happy to be back. How did you deal with those people and being in that country?" And actually, I've grown to love the culture. And many of the Iraqis that I had met, had dinner with, had working relationships with, great people, even though there's so much we disagree on. There's so much we disagree on. Well, wonderful people, most of them. And I realized that we have far more in common than we had different. There was a much less that differentiated each other from ourselves. I don't know if that's the right sentence, but that's how I said it.
Yeah.
And then I ended up going back several times. I ended up spending like 4 years of my 20s in Iraq. And the more I went back, the more I loved the culture. The more I went back, the more I spent time in Jordan and in Kuwait and in the Middle East. And I still love it to this day. And I realized that as an American growing up post 9/11, because I was 18, 19 when that happened. So Americans and people from the Middle East, like arch enemies, polar opposites, right? And I fell in love with the culture and I love so many of them. And so like it's fine if you have to go fight a war with somebody. It's fine if you have to be adversarial in the workplace if you don't agree on everything, but that doesn't have to translate to hate.
What were those things that you found that were common? Like you said, you're at war with these people's country. What were you finding in common?
I mean, you had Iraqis. I spent a lot of time in the rural areas outside of the cities. A lot of our bases we set up just outside of the cities. Um, and so these people were farmers. My family
Hmm.
are farmers. And we literally wanted the exact same things. We wanted to rain, or at least the irrigation to work. We wanted our seed, and we wanted to be able to sell it at the market so that we could feed our family. And the more we talked, the more we realized that we all really wanted the same things. I talked to the people who became Iraqi police, and they just wanted a country that was safe enough to raise their families. When we would work with the Iraqi army, they just wanted to bring their country back under control and get the
Mhm.
foreigners out of it so that they could manage and rule their own country. It's the conversation is not much different than what we have here in the US or what they're saying in Canada or anywhere else. We just want to be autonomous and happy.
Why did you go into the military?
Ha! Well, that's easy. Because I was captivated by action films as a young child. My older brother had joined the army and he started a knife collection for me when I was like probably 11. And everywhere he would go, he'd bring me back a knife, a machete, or something like that. And in second grade, I told my mom I was dropping out of school, and she laughed. But my opinion never changed, so I knew there was no hope of me going to college, so I needed a plan after high school. And so that for me was the Army. It always was the Army. There was no plan B.
It seems like you had a special relationship with your brother. Can you expand on that more? Why was that so impactful that he would bring you back these knives and yeah, what was that relationship like?
He was a good brother. I mean, he was the first one of us to kind of leave the cornfield and do something interesting, right? So we'd have stories and he'd send pictures of him jumping out of airplanes and, you know, in the uniform, out in the field with the guns and everything, like what little boy doesn't love that stuff, right? And I ironically like just around the area that I grew up in, I couldn't see my future anywhere. My dad was a painter, he had been a farmer, a lot of our family friends were farmers or people in the trades, construction. It didn't seem like meaningful work to me. It didn't seem like something I could love. And then people that went to college, they went to college so that they could have a shot at managing the hardware store when the guy that was managing it now retired. Um, there's no fortune companies, no big business. And so I was like, okay, continue school, something I hate, to have a job I could probably do right now. Or join the army, because that's the only thing that would get me out of this place and into a meaningful existence. And I guess I have to say that when we would go to like the cafes, and you would always see in the corner like the group of old men wearing their hats with the war or the branch they were a part of. And I would always try to get like us sitting as closely as possible so I could listen to their stories, right? Because that was like meaningful to me. They had like changed history. Some of them World War II veterans. We had for a while we had one of the oldest uh, World War II veterans um, living in our area. And so you hear these people from Vietnam and stuff like that, and I was just like, yeah, that sounds awesome. That is like meaningful, and they'd experienced everything that life has had to offer, and I had little hope of experiencing anything other than this small town.
I've been in those cafe seats with my own grandfathers who both fought in World War II. I've heard those stories in small town Kansas. So, man, that really resonates with me, Tim. I hear that and I feel that. If you don't mind me asking, is your brother still with us?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
He's
You just said he was, so I wanted to make sure I covered the bases
well,
there.
he's terrible now. I hate him. No, I'm just kidding. The kindness games. No. He never left North Carolina. So he was stationed at Fort Bragg with the 82nd Airborne, and then
Yeah,
he married someone out there, and they still live out by Wilmington. So
very good.
yeah,
Very good. I love that area of the country, man.
it's beautiful.
My wife and I vacationed to the just south of there in Southport quite a bit out on the Outer Banks. So I love
Nice.
that area of North Carolina. Okay. So you've referenced it a few times, the kindness games. Um, it seems like maybe several years after the initial story that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation with your friends, you move away from the Bay Area. The kindness games. I love the reference there that you said you felt like we were in an ideological Hunger Games. What were you feeling and sensing in September of 2020 that led you and spurred you on to action, Tim, to go and not just, okay, it's great that you have these conversations with your friends, but to go and create something?
Well, I wish I could say I had this grand plan, but at the end of the day, two significant things happened. COVID happened in early 2020. California went into lockdown at the end of February, beginning of March. One of the first places to go into lockdown, and I had to take business trips on security. Right, I still had to travel for certain things, and so I had to travel to a place that made you do a 2 week quarantine in a hotel room. And I was so excited because I was like, oh man, okay, so here's how my COVID started. I don't know how your COVID started, but this is how mine did. My wife and I do foster care, as I referenced. She had just taken two foster kids the week before, one 5 days old and one 3 months old, both right in that crying age. We had a 2 bedroom apartment in the Bay Area, and all of a sudden, like, hey, do all your meetings with all your executives from your living room. And so basically, like, I'm in my living room on the computer. My wife has kids in the bedroom on each side of the living room, and she's running back and forth trying to keep them like quiet and fed and changed. And so I had to go on this work trip, and I was like, oh, thank God. I got to get out of the house. This place is killing me. Maybe I'll get some rest. I'll get something done. And I did for like a week. For like a week, like I was super productive, really rested. And then the George Floyd thing happened. I had a week left on my quarantine. And so I was just forced to watch that over and over and over again on TV. And then my meetings, people canceled them. And when we had meetings, all we were talking about was this tragedy. And then my wife called, and she'd be like, hey, so they're having protests in our area. I have two kids here. What should I do if they start burning down our neighborhood? So our neighborhood, one way in, one way out, dead ends in the San Francisco Bay.
Hmm.
And so it's like, okay, we can go about a block further and then there's water. And so I was having to talk her through the preparations that I should be making. And she was reminding me every day, you should be here doing this. I should not have to be worried about this. And I still had a week left on that quarantine, and I still had about a week or two of work after that. So it was going to be 2 to 3 weeks before I got back home. And when I did, we immediately left for the cornfield because really no protests, no COVID out there. Actually, we called home like, hey, and they weren't masks, and people were like, why? Nobody comes here. And we're just not taking vacations anymore. So we left, we went back out there. And then in September 2020, I found myself having to go back on a business trip to the same place. And they actually put me in the same hotel room, shockingly, because the hotel was so empty.
Hmm.
And the door closed behind me. And I turned on the TV, and it was just the Portland courthouse. You know, the police around the courthouse, the protesters lobbing explosives and fireworks at them, this whole clash. And I was like, oh, man, I can't do this again. And I took a shower. I came back out, switched the channels a couple times. And I was like, I actually had the thought, I wonder if I'm going to make it out of this room with my sanity intact, which is shocking considering I have 4 international incidents that I've been a part of that you and most of your listeners watch on the news, and very minor, like no mental health effects ever, no history of depression, no sustained PTSD, nothing like this, right? And in this luxury hotel room with an ocean view, this is where Tim goes nuts. This is where he loses his mind. This is crazy. And so I turn off the TV and I open up my computer to LinkedIn, and this guy that I'd only met virtually, Lee Outen, we've been recording podcasts since security podcasts since COVID had begun. And he had this ridiculous post that he is the owner of a company, a security company in Mexico. And he's like lifting up like these 2 young guys who had gone to like a workshop and gotten a certificate. And he's like, look at these guys. They're going to be the future of the company, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, whatever, dude. That's crap. Stupid. Like, why would you post that? Ridiculous. Like, we're all supposed to do better. We're all supposed to make ourselves better. They're not special. And that's where I was right then. I slammed my computer shut. I was like, idiots. And so I tried to like play a game on my phone or something. And I couldn't get it off my mind. And the more I thought about it, the more I laughed. I was like, that was so stupid. But these are 2 19-year-olds in Mexico in the security industry, not a glamorous career, but their boss has like 10,000 followers. He's a globally recognized security influencer. He knows all the people that run the security industry. I wonder how happy they are that he lifted them up for the world, the top level of the industry to see them, which they may not have had that opportunity. They may never have had that opportunity to be seen and known by that. And the more I thought about it, I said, I'm not opposed to doing ridiculous things. And that seems to be a worthwhile effort in ridiculousness. And you know what? This actually might give me some positivity to focus on. If I could find people who have been kind, who have done good things, and I have a platform. I'm an influencer myself. I am also at the top end of that security industry. I have the eyes of the people that run this place on me. I bet I could do that same thing for them. And so I messaged Lee. I was like, hey, I'm having troubles, man. This is my situation. Uh, we should just do this. Like, do you want to do this for 30 days? He's like, why 30 days? I'm like, I don't know. Because it's going to be 2 weeks before I get out of this room. So hopefully it keeps me from going crazy. He's like, yeah, let's start tomorrow. I said, okay. So I did this little post, the kindness games, starting tomorrow. And I woke up and it was already like noon Lee's time. And he's like, Tim and I are going to do a video a day, every day for 30 days. I was like, a video? Are you freaking kidding me? Come on, man. I was just going to type a couple nice words. And so he started, and we started. And by the time I left that hotel room, we had probably like 5 other people starting. I was like, that's weird, but cool. We were telling people like, you should do this. And then by the time I got home to finish my 30 days, we had like 10 people going in. I was talking to Lee. He's like, hey, there's a couple people not too far behind. Like, what are we going to do when they finish this? We told them to do it. And I was like, I don't know if they become alumni. And then it just kept going. And by the end of the year, we had 30 people who had finished, two people who are in the top crust of the security industry, which blew our minds that they would even consider getting involved. But more importantly, we had one person who had finished a challenge on every continent in the world except for Antarctica. And I was like, what the heck is going on?
And the challenge was just to post once a day for 30 days, lifting someone up, being kind, sharing a story, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to go back to something you mentioned, you've talked about kind of being on relief duty at Abu Ghraib prison, and you mentioned you were a part of 4 like events that we
Mhm.
would know about. What were the other 3? So you mentioned Abu Ghraib. What were the
We
others?
got the invasion of Iraq,
Gotcha.
Abu Ghraib. Uh, we have the assassination attempt on the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. in D.C. in 2011, which I was working for the Saudi royal family as an executive protection person during that time. And then you have Benghazi, which I was actually working as a tactical instructor teaching diplomats how to not get killed when they went overseas when that happened. And my group of 7 people got grabbed by Congress to say, hey, here's all the recommendations we're making for all diplomats going to high threat zones. You need to build a new course that encompasses 90% of these so that we can move forward and get past this. And so what I was assigned was to design the embassy overrun scenario, except everybody gets out this time. And then we were actually, me and my team, we were on the news taking reporters through this. It's like on YouTube, you can go see that stuff.
So that was post Benghazi,
Yeah.
the incident in Benghazi. Okay, so Tim, you mentioned that going through all that you just mentioned there, you hadn't had a history of PTSD. You hadn't had a history of dealing with any of this internal mental strife or struggle, but yet here you are in a hotel room by yourself, alone in your thoughts, and I guess you've got your connection to the outside world with your TV. What about that situation and what you were seeing brought these feelings to the surface for you?
Uh, I mean, it's because, all right, so like I was stuck, subjected to the environment with no recourse, right? So you see the movies to where they're like, we're going to kill you, but we're going to make your family watch it. And like, that's worse than being killed, is like, oh, my family's going to have to watch this, right? And so, like, this whole thing, this protest movement, Black Lives Matter, everything, protesting is fine. I personally don't believe that burning down cities is. And just watching this, and so in one sense, you have a combat veteran who has literally put myself in danger to protect this country, watching it burn. And so I have anger, right? And I'm having conversations, and I'm like, you are angry. I am also angry. And I'm also having these thoughts of like, well, maybe I should just kid up and get out there and fight my side of the battle, which I didn't. But the thoughts were there.
Sure.
But if I'm not in that hotel room, I can go and do something else, right? But I'm forced to be there. So, but then I switch the channel, and then it's the ideological Hunger Games. Well, if you're this person, then you have to hate these people, and if you're these people, you have to hate them, and you cannot get along. That is no, because one is good and one is evil, and one needs to thrive and one needs to be destroyed, which also makes me angry. But here's the thing: like when I get angry, like some people get angry and they howl at the moon, and we've seen videos of that, right? I have the ability to go and affect change with my anger in a very violent way. And I know a lot of people felt that. And so sitting in that room, right, I'm feeling those emotions, but I don't get a chance to walk away from them. Like how do I deal with this in this echo chamber? And I have nowhere else to turn to. And it's just that whole concept of being forced to watch something that you love be killed, or just be forced to watch people who quote unquote hate you, because guess what? The people that say like, "Oh, I hate those people and those people are me," actually we're friends and you just don't know where I stand, which is kind of funny.
Hmm.
Just saying it. And so that was where I was in that hotel room. It was just a trapped, terrible place to be. I don't know if you can make sense of that, but that's a really dark place where I was at, and it was terrible.
Yeah, the reason this show exists is because of a similar situation.
Really.
I'm sitting just beyond this door. Nobody can see me. Nobody can see the door right now, but there's a door right to my right here. I'm sitting just out there watching the 10 o'clock news at night with my wife. Right after those protests, after George Floyd was murdered, protests happening in downtown Denver. Um, the explosives, the tear gas, the military style police response, and then of course the backlash against that, and just and hearing the news anchors on the different channels reporting on the same event through very, very different lenses,
Right.
and just having this overwhelming sense of, I don't think this is who we are. Like, this is how we're acting in this moment, but I don't think this is who we are corporately, like as a
Right.
people. And so I'm out of that story. I've got to ask you, Tim. You said you very clearly have a demonstrated ability to affect change through violence, through your anger, through an overwhelming show of force.
Right.
You've been there. You've been there. You've done that.
Spent my 20s doing that.
Exactly. What what has to happen for what you did to take place for someone where they feel so helpless? I think a lot of people, I'm gonna throw this on a lot of people. Maybe it's not true, maybe it is. I think a lot of people, when they get into that area, or that feeling of helplessness, the response is to lash out. The
Right.
response is to be angry. The response is to try to inflict damage on others because of how I'm feeling. Your response was, I'm going to go start something called the kindness games and tell people to be positive for 30 days. When you have this ability,
Yeah.
you took that ability of violence and set it aside and said, I'm going to go the other direction. Why, Tim?
Well, because I have been a combat medic, paramedic. I had an 18-year career in EMS, tactical medicine. And so, one, like I understand what true violence looks like and how easy it is actually for me, and what the aftermath looks like because I've been elbow deep in that aftermath. And I'm not a criminal. So, like, say what you want about warfare. You are sanctioned to be there, right? And right or wrong, whether you agree with it or not, it's just the way it is. So, I mean, as long as you're following the rules of land warfare, you're not in the wrong. You're in a bad spot, but you're not in the wrong. And even on both sides, the professional soldiers, there's a respect there. Like, I'm here because I have a job. You're here. We have a job. That's why professional militaries treat their POWs well, because it's not personal. It's what we're here to do. And so, like, one, um, I've done it the honorable way, and I'm not a criminal. So I'm not going to dishonor myself or bring dishonor to my family or end my amazing career or like set the dominoes in motion. Unless you bring the fight to my door, and then I'm back in the right, and then I'm going to end it. The other thing is, like, these cowards doing these things, they don't actually have to look at the aftermath. They look at it on the news. They don't go back and go elbow deep to try to save the people that they've injured on their side or the other side. And I've done both. I mean, can you imagine being involved in a combat engagement and then treating somebody for wounds that your team gave them? Like that's a very different place to be. So that's not the way. But the other thing is violence begets violence and hate begets hate. And the fact of the matter is that if we can change people's minds, make them focus on things that are better, positive, kindness, the good things that are being sown in the world around them, that will change the way they think. It changed the way I thought. And now, with over 50 alumni, we have had people who were actively contemplating suicide, join the kindness games, get a counselor, start a new career, completely change their life. We have had people in dark spaces. We have had people coming from all sorts of dark spaces who have renewed their mind in kindness, who have found and rebuilt the faith in their fellow man, who have learned to have self-control and have meaningful conversations so that you can do the smart fight, which is, hey, I hear what you're saying, but it actually doesn't make sense. Kind of like what I did in the conversation that we started with. And to watch somebody go from angry to lost, like they just woke up and they're like, hey, I was in bed a few minutes ago. Where am I right now? Like just that complete thoughtlessness. And they find themselves out in the middle of the street and they're like, where am I? I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be in bed. That's a better way to fight. Don't you agree?
I absolutely. That's powerful imagery to go from angry to lost.
It happens. I mean, I know you have these conversations too. And when you break through
Yeah.
a little bit of that cognitive dissonance to where they are literally lost, like that's the first thing that I've heard that's made sense in 10 years, 6 months, 2 years. Where am I? Because I have no idea where I'm at now that that little ray of light has shone through.
Until you said that, Tim, I was the question that was rolling around in my mind is like, what do you do? What I have experienced and what I have seen, and this is not a left-right thing. This is not a Republican-Democrat thing. So many people do it, myself included. You're so angry and feel so helpless that even the thought of acquiescing to, I don't even know if that's a word, that the person that you are angry or feel helpless or defenseless against has a good point that they're making, feels like that you will spiral even further into your helplessness and your anger.
Yeah.
So the thought is, I'm just always going to believe that they are wrong. I cannot support anything they stand for. I just see so much of that extreme thinking out there that, and I'm having a hard time articulating the question that I have for you here, but like, how do we even begin to have the conversation with someone who is that angry?
There's a secret that most people don't know. Almost everybody has a religion that they nearly blindly serve. It can be Christianity, it can be Islam, it can be climate change, it can be left-wing ideology, right-wing ideology, it can be Trump, it can be Biden, it can be whatever thing that you have so wed your soul to that it cannot be wrong, which is a problem. And I say that from a perspective of I'm actually very religious. Like I'm a Christian.
Same.
I'm locked into that faith. I preach in church. I'm an elder. I've been a deacon. I do all these things. But there's one thing that you should be doing. You should be studying and you should be challenging your beliefs. Because if I really believe in something, shouldn't it be true? And so that's why it's interesting, because if you go on YouTube and you look up like debates, right? Top things that are going to come up are religious debate, Christian versus Muslim, blah 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 blah, or Christian denomination versus Christian denomination, or Muslim sect versus Muslim sect, right? And the interesting thing is, right now, the world is so against quote unquote organized religion because of how thoughtless it is, but the people that are in organized religion are actually working their way through their beliefs and their understanding of their beliefs and their questions more than the people with secular religions, which are usually political. And so I have to ask a question. If you hold a belief that you believe in so strongly, are you able to articulate my position if it's different than yours? Because if you can't, you don't own that position. You're renting somebody else's, and you don't even realize you're renting it.
Good stuff, man. I say one of the things I say all the time, and I've been articulating this over the last 8 months or so, and I've never said it here on this podcast. So here we go. I too am a Christian, a faithful man. I have never been so uncertain of what it means to be a Christian and yet so certain in my faith, if that makes sense. Adam Grant says it a different way. The author and psychologist Adam Grant says, just be willing to think again. Hold true to your values and loosely to your opinions.
Yeah. When COVID set in and we all went home, and then I told my team, like, hey, 3-week vacation. Like, do the bare minimum of what you need to do, but once this curve is flattened, like, we're going to get back out there. So, like, take a break. And then, like, 8 weeks later, we're like, this might not change. And so I pulled my team together because our program historically focused on office spaces, securing office spaces. And I said, look, we manage the risk to the most sensitive information at Facebook, which has historically been in the office, and it is currently not. So, what foundational assumptions are no longer true? What premises, assumptions have we built our programs, have we built our risk management systems, have we built our services upon that are no longer true? Last meeting of the week, this is a Monday. You're going to go through all of your policies, all of your procedures, all of your services, print them out, and take a highlighter to everything that is no longer true. And then ask yourself, what may be true now? It's a good way to start.
No disagreement from me there. Tim, we're running up against the end of our time here, and I feel like I haven't asked you enough about the kindness game. So
sorry, I talk a lot, man.
No. It has been phenomenal. But I do have to ask. So you go through, you've got 50, what you call alumni now. After the first year, you had 30 people who had at least one person on every continent except Antarctica who had been through the 30-day kindness games. I'll call it a challenge. Where does the kindness game sit now? Now that here we are recording this in late March of 2023, where is the kindness games? What is the kindness games these days?
So the interesting thing, the kindness games exist in a lot of different ways right now. We have the game that people play on social media. But we found out that as 2020 came to a close and we started the return to normal, when things are good, people don't play the game as much. But when layoffs started happening, people started playing again. So the game will fluctuate, and the game is around when you need it. And it's around when we need it. I'm actually on over 200 posts, and we have the normal, the kindness games. We have the Jingle Bell Kindness, which is the 30 days between Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day. That's our holiday special, but also my father-in-law, right after I came back, so I came back in October of 2020 from that trip. The next month, the weekend before Thanksgiving, my father-in-law passed away. And they asked me to preach a sermon because we couldn't find anybody to do it because we weren't supposed to be having funerals. And so I needed another intervention. And I realized there was 30 days. And so I did Jingle Bell Kindness. And then we have 24 hours of kindness. Every New Year's Eve, we rock in the new year for every time zone in the world. And there's like 36 of them, actually. Because there's a lot of countries that do like the half hours, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's some that just refuse to share time zones with each other. So there's like multiple. But so yeah, we ring in the kindness. We ring in the new year for each time zone in the world as it reaches midnight their time, which is a fun thing to do. So these are all different ways that we can participate. But the other thing is, it didn't take long before companies started asking us, like, hey, do you do wellness programs? Do you do leadership initiatives? Do you do these things? And we do. So we have actually been providing workshops. We've done wellness programs to increase employee engagement, especially among remote workforces. We have workshops that are available to the public, storytelling for business environments, owning your presence. And you probably do owning your presence better with your TED, but you know what? Let the little guys make some money. We do we do leading remote teams, and then we do another one that for some reason I'm blanking on right now. But why? Oh, strong enough. So imposter syndrome, I'm unworthy, why am I so, like these mental narrations, we have a workshop to help you work through that as well. And so people say, like, why are the kindness games teaching business skills? Like, it's not has nothing to do with kindness. Well, one, we believe in leading with kindness holistically, but two, if you've been listening to this podcast, you will see that leading with kindness necessitates good communication. And so if you're going to do a business presentation or present at a conference or have that difficult conversation with your boss or a trouble employee or whatever, you might be kind and use a storyline, right? Use a story arc to grab their engagement, help them feel the correct emotions so that we can get to the decision point together. You might do well to learn how your presence affects every environment and every situation you walk into, virtually or in person, so that you can say, this is what I need to get out of this situation. And the people that are on the other side of the situation, this is what they need to get out of. So how does Tim need to show up to facilitate the best result for both of us, for all of us? I mean, if you have teams that are distributed, they're remote, they're disconnected, you might do well to build community and bring that team together around a purpose, around a cause. Have a little bit of a family environment. Not only will you get better output, but you'll just serve people well. And so we believe that these are things that people struggle with that lead to toxic workplaces. It leads to people being unkind. It leads to some people doing really well and some people not doing really well. And we can help change those things. And I think at the end of this year, beginning of next year, if I keep writing, we have a book coming out about the first year. And the first 30 alumni have contributed their stories to the book. So there's a little bit going on.
That's beautiful. I can't wait to read the book. Absolutely. Tim, what do you want people to take away from this conversation? Like, if there was something that right after this, we're done talking and they move on to their next podcast, what do you want? What's the action you want people to take from hearing your words today?
Well, it's funny because people that don't know Lee and I, especially people in the security or tough industries, or people that are type A people, they'll say, well, that sounds super woke, Tim, and it sounds like nice and fluffy, but to be honest, you can't always be kind in this world, which is hilarious because Lee and I are both combat veterans. So we both spent multiple years in Iraq. And we just kind of smile and we'll say, like, let's talk about how to be kind in tough situations, because we have been in basically every type of tough situation. The definition of kindness, as we have redefined it, is the endeavor to identify the humans on the other side of each life situation and understand how I might tailor the best outcome for them. it doesn't mean it's a good outcome. If you have to terminate somebody, they're not going to be happy being terminated, but you can leave them with their dignity. You can make sure that they have some benefits. You can give them some runway. You can be kind in those situations, right? So leading with kindness is the strongest, most engaging, most sustainable form of leadership. And I would ask you to try to make a list of instances or situations in your life to where you are convinced you cannot be kind. And then send me a message and we'll set up a Zoom call and we'll talk about it.
Tim, I'm struck by the imagery here just now as you said that. You are one who has experienced in the very literal and in the very literal especially slinging arrows and dealing with the ramifications of where they land.
Yeah.
And I love that, man. I love that so much. What's a question that you wish you were asked more? Last question for you here. What's a question that you wish you were asked more?
Oh man, I don't know. Yeah, you stumped me.
That question stumps a lot of people, but
yeah,
I like to ask it anyway.
About that one. That's a good one. I wish people would make that list and say, hey, I like the idea of leading with kindness, but I can't because. And actually have thought that through, because I would love to have that conversation. And maybe it's not a simple thing, right? Life is tough. But kindness is not about being nice. It's about the other thing, trying to architect the best outcomes for everyone involved, even when they're not good outcomes, right? And so we need to kind of shake up how we think about kindness and how we think about serving each other. And I would love to have that conversation.
Well, Tim, I have loved this conversation, and I hope somebody, at least one person, takes you up on that. I'll put your contact information and all your stuff in the show notes. But man, thank you so much, not only for the work that you do, but the person that you very clearly are. Oh, I appreciate you, man. Thanks so much for coming on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hopefully we'll do it again.
Major thanks to Tim for sharing his story on the show. Please do me and Tim a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might find some value in listening to our conversation. Share this episode with your network. Help Tim and I spread the good word about the importance of following your curiosity and asking more questions. And if you like the conversations with the amazing guests like Tim that I have on each and every episode, please subscribe so that you never miss when a new episode drops. You can get in touch with me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can go to my website and reach out there. That's michaelashford.com. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.